They thought no one would notice. But on April 2025, deep in the Sahel, 3 lorries crossed from Côte d'Ivoire into Burkina Faso, carrying hundreds of motorbikes meant for terrorists. And not just anywhere. They were headed straight for gold-rich zones that had just been placed under state protection by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. It wasn't a mistake. It was an attack, a betrayal. And 2 names quickly surfaced: Ouattara and Ruto. What followed shook the entire continent. If you believe Africa must rise on its own terms, this story is for you. Like this video, subscribe, and witness the fire that refused to die. If you still believe that a small nation can stand tall against global giants, if you believe Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice on its own terms, if you've seen that fire in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the kind that refuses to bow, refuses to sell, refuses to be broken, then this story belongs to you. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not just to support, but to stand together, to walk side by side through a rising wave of African awakening, because what began as whispers has now become a silent storm. The shock didn't fade. Just days after the lorries were stopped, new details began to surface, and they were alarming. The vehicles weren't carrying humanitarian aid as labeled. They were packed with fuel tanks, spare parts, and encrypted communication devices, items often used by militant groups in the Sahel. The intended recipients, armed factions operating near Inata and Yalogo, the very gold zones that Captain Ibrahim Traoré had recently brought under national control. Security officials acted fast. Footage from drone surveillance showed the convoy taking a remote dirt road, avoiding official checkpoints. It was no accident. This was a planned infiltration designed to bypass detection. The timing raised even more suspicion. Why now? Why so close to the recently nationalized mines? Captain Ibrahim Traoré was briefed at dawn. His face, usually calm, was sharp with intensity. He gave the order: intercept, contain, investigate. Within hours, special forces had tracked and surrounded the convoy. No shots were fired, but the silence said everything. What they found inside was damning. Documents hidden beneath tarpaulin detailed supply routes, names of operatives, and even projected dates for ground destabilization. It was no longer just a smuggling case, it was evidence of a broader operation. One aimed at undermining state authority and creating chaos where stability had just been restored. For Traoré, this wasn't just another security incident. It was a declaration of war, not with bombs, but with deception. And in the quiet briefing room where the facts were laid out, one thing became clear: someone powerful was pulling strings from across the border. What began as a suspicious convoy had now exploded into a geopolitical firestorm, and Traore was standing right at the center of it. But the mystery didn't last long. Within 48 hours, chatter from intercepted communications and leaked diplomatic notes pointed fingers straight at 2 sitting African presidents: Alassane Ouattara of Côte d'Ivoire, William Ruto of Kenya, 2 powerful men publicly promoting regional peace and economic cooperation, now accused of fueling a covert operation to destabilize Burkina Faso. At first, the claims seemed too bold to believe, but Captain Ibrahim Traoré had seen enough betrayals to recognize a familiar pattern. He didn't need to guess, he needed evidence, and that evidence came fast. Border control logs showed unusual clearance granted to foreign lorries just days before the incident. The route matched the seized convoy. The paperwork bore consular seals. Simultaneously, a confidential memo surfaced, an internal briefing, allegedly sent to a Western embassy in Abidjan. It described a multilateral effort to rebalance control of key mining corridors in the Sahel. The language was coded, the intention wasn't. Someone wanted Traoré gone. Across Ouagadougou, whispers turned into accusations. Who would benefit from removing Traoré? The answer was obvious to many. By nationalizing the gold mines and cutting out foreign intermediaries, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had disrupted a profitable network, one that stretched beyond Africa's borders. Ouattara and Ruto, long seen as friendly to Western economic interests, now stood in the crosshairs of a growing public fury. In response, state television in Burkina Faso aired a rare segment. It featured raw footage of the intercepted convoy side by side with speeches made by Ouattara and Ruto in recent months, where both had criticized the militarization of gold mining in the Sahel. The subtext was chilling. This wasn't just a matter of foreign policy, it was personal. Traore didn't speak publicly that day, but his silence echoed louder than any statement. Inside the presidential compound, a simple truth was being understood. When you stand for Africa's gold, you stand against the global order and those within your own continent who serve it. And for Traore, this fight had just begun. As the dust from the convoy scandal began to settle, a new wave of pressure surfaced this time, cloaked in diplomacy. President Alassane Ouattara called for an emergency peace summit in Abidjan, the official reason to discuss regional stability in the Sahel. Invitations were sent out quickly, many addressed to Sahelian leaders. Captain Ibrahim Traoré received one too, but Traore didn't attend. He had no intention of sitting across the table from the very man whose border had been used to smuggle weapons into his country. It wasn't stubbornness, it was clarity. There was no peace to negotiate if the hands offering it were the same hands fueling unrest. Almost immediately, his refusal triggered a media storm. Major Western outlets released near-identical headlines. Burkina Faso isolates itself. Traore refuses. Peace crisis deepens in the Sahel. Overnight, he went from national hero to international liability, at least in the eyes of the foreign press. Back in Ouagadougou, analysts noticed something unusual. The coverage was too synchronized, the language too coordinated. It was more than bias, it was a script, crafted, approved, and deployed. The goal: undermine public confidence in Traore and present him as an aggressor, uncooperative, irrational, and dangerous. Meanwhile, another move was unfolding on the ground. 3 more convoys, disguised again as humanitarian aid, attempted to cross into Burkina Faso. Each carried boxes of medical supplies, stacked neatly over crates of ammunition and satellite phones. But this time, they were caught at the southern checkpoint by local police. The officers had orders strict and clear from the top, and they acted without hesitation. Within hours, the arrests were made public. But instead of headlines condemning the breach, foreign outlets went quiet. Not one major network covered the seizures. Not one questioned why peace was being pushed from the north, while weapons arrived from the south. Traore remained composed. He didn't rant or lash out. He simply authorized a full broadcast. Images of the intercepted convoys were aired with audio transcripts of foreign advisors discussing logistics and timing disruptions. Burkina Faso's national broadcaster did what the global giants wouldn't. It told the truth. Then came the revelation that changed everything. A leaked recording obtained through military surveillance captured a conversation between 2 foreign operatives. One referenced replacing Traore before July. Another warned he's tighter than Goita. We'll need more than just pressure. For the Burkina people, that was the final straw. Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't avoiding peace, he was surviving a silent war. A war waged through summits and headlines, waged through propaganda and polished handshakes. But unlike many before him, he didn't blink. He stayed standing. And that made him dangerous to all the wrong people. But something unexpected happened. What was meant to weaken Captain Ibrahim Traoré ended up strengthening him beyond measure. The attempted media takedown and the covert aggression did not go unnoticed. Instead, they sparked something raw and powerful, something no summit, no headline, no convoy could contain. Across the African continent, from Accra to Johannesburg, from the suburbs of Nairobi to the dusty roads of Niamey, people rose, not in silence, not in fear, but in furious clarity. It began with students. Then came workers, mothers, farmers, taxi drivers veterans. They poured into streets with homemade banners and handwritten signs. Some bore the face of Thomas Sankara. Others held portraits of Captain Ibrahim Traoré with the words, "You attack him, you attack us all. Our gold, our voice, our fight." In Lagos, over 10,000 marched through the business district, chanting "Traore is Africa." In Dakar, thousands gathered outside foreign embassies, demanding an end to neo-colonial interference. Even in cities like Paris, London, and New York, African diaspora communities stood shoulder to shoulder, defiant in the rain. They knew what was at stake. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It was about principle, sovereignty, dignity. And in the middle of it all stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Not just a soldier, not just a president, but a living rejection of betrayal. A young man who had risked everything to say, "Our gold will not be stolen. Not again, not this time." Traore didn't call for these protests. He didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than any official statement. His silence had become a roar in every language across the continent. At night, state TV showed images of solidarity from Lusaka, Harare, Kigali. Traore watched them quietly. Around him, ministers and officers reported rising support, not just from the people, but from inside governments that had once distanced themselves. One advisor leaned in and whispered, "You've become a mirror, Captain. They see themselves in you now," and he was right. Because in that moment, Traore was no longer just defending the borders of Burkina Faso. He was defending an African future, one where the soil beneath their feet belonged to the people who walked on it, one where African leaders could no longer be bought. For the first time in years, the continent was not divided by fear, but united by a flame ignited not in policy rooms or foreign parliaments, but in the heart of a young man who simply refused to kneel. And that was something no convoy, no president, no propaganda could extinguish. In the end, it wasn't just a failed plot. It was a turning point. The attempted betrayal by those who once called themselves brothers had exposed something deeper, something festering beneath the surface of modern African politics. The gold, the weapons, the manipulated headlines, none of it had succeeded in toppling Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But they had done something else. They had awakened a continent. At the AES summit in Niamey, just weeks later, the message was delivered not in whispers but in thunder. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood shoulder to shoulder and declared in one voice, "Any attack on our resources will be treated as an act of war against the people of Africa." No diplomatic jargon, no backdoor deals, just truth raw and resolute. The world took notice. Suddenly, foreign ambassadors requested private meetings. Offers of support were made conditional, as always. But Traore remained unmoved. He wasn't there to negotiate away Africa's dignity. He was there to defend it. In a symbolic moment that would be replayed across social media for days, Traore held up a gold nugget during his closing remarks. This, he said calmly, is not just metal. It is memory. It is blood. It is the future of our children, and we will not let it be sold again. The room was silent. Even his critics could not deny the weight of his words. But the lesson wasn't just for foreigners. It was for those within. For men like Ouattara and Ruto leaders who had chosen comfort over courage, compromise over country. Traore never named them directly. He didn't need to. The silence around their absence at Niamey was louder than any accusation. Back home in Ouagadougou, the people greeted him, not as a president, but as a protector. Not with scripted chants, but with songs of Sankara and new anthems of resistance. Flags waved not just for Burkina Faso, but for a dream larger than borders, larger than flags, a united, self-reliant Africa. And as the sun set on that defining chapter, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood not as a survivor of a coup, but as the symbol of a quiet revolution. A revolution not marked by gunfire, but by clarity, unity, and fire in the eyes of millions who had once been told to stay silent. In history, some leaders defend power. Others defend people. Traore had chosen the latter. And for those who betrayed that cause, those who tried to sell out gold for favor sovereignty for silence, they may still hold office. But in the hearts of the people, their legacy was sealed. They had chosen the wrong side of history, and Africa had taken a step forward on its own feet, in its own voice. If you still believe that a small nation can stand tall in the face of global giants, if you believe Africa has the right to tell its own story in its own language with its own voice, if you've seen the fire in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the fire that does not bow, does not break, and does not ask for permission, then this story is your story too. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, not just to support it, but to walk alongside a rising wave of truth. Because what began as a whisper in the Sahel is now a storm echoing across the entire continent, and history is listening. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is more than a tale of one man against hidden powers. It is a powerful lesson about the cost of defending truth in a world shaped by manipulation and silence. At its core, this crisis revealed how quickly sovereignty can become a target when it threatens global interests. The intercepted convoys, the staged peace summit, and the media attacks all served a single purpose: to remove a leader who refused to sell out Africa's wealth. But Traoré's response taught us something critical: that resistance, when rooted in dignity and supported by the people, can become unstoppable. He never shouted, he never begged. He stood firm, allowing the truth to rise and rally a continent around him. The lesson is also a warning: betrayal doesn't always come from foreign forces. Sometimes it comes wearing a familiar face, dressed in suits and speaking the language of progress while acting as agents of exploitation. Traoré's leadership forces us to ask, who do our leaders truly serve, our people or their foreign patrons? His silence exposed more than words ever could. And when Africa rose in his defense, it marked a turning point, a shift from division to unity, from dependence to defiance. The story reminds us that real power lies not in weapons or speeches, but in choosing principle over compromise. In a world that often rewards those who bend, Traoré stood straight, and in doing so he became more than a president. He became a symbol, a shield, a lesson for all who dare to betray, and a light for those still fighting to reclaim what is rightfully theirs. The response from viewers was immediate, intense, and deeply personal. Across platforms, the comments poured in like a flood of voices long silenced. Many called Captain Ibrahim Traoré the last true guardian of Africa's soul, a leader who dared to say no when everyone else stayed quiet. Some said they wept while watching, not from sadness, but from the sudden weight of clarity. This is the kind of story they never want us to hear, one viewer wrote. And now that we've heard it, we can't unsee it. In Accra, a teacher posted that she replayed the video to her class of teenagers, saying, "This is what courage looks like." In Johannesburg, a veteran of the anti-apartheid movement said Traoré reminded him of Mandela in his early days, calm but unshakable. Others were angrier, directing their fury at those who tried to betray their own people. Ruto and Ouattara sold us out. One comment read, "But we are awake now." Thousands echoed this sentiment with hashtags like "Africa is rising" and "Traore is not alone," trending across the diaspora. From London to Kinshasa, the comment sections became arenas of unity, defiance, and pride. People began to share stories of exploitation in their own countries, gold stolen land, seized leaders bribed. And in each post, they tied their pain back to Traoré's stand. For many, this wasn't just a story about Burkina Faso. It was a mirror reflecting what had been lost and what could still be reclaimed. He didn't just defend a mine. Someone said he defended our dignity. Some even called on their own leaders to speak up or step aside. Across all these voices, one thing became clear: Captain Ibrahim Traoré had ignited something far bigger than himself. He had reminded a scattered people of their shared fire. And for every word typed, every comment left, the message was the same: we are watching, we are listening, and we will no longer be silent. In the days following the release of the story, the internet lit up with emotion. What began as a video soon became a movement. Comment sections turned into forums of awakening grief and pride. People from all over the African continent and from diasporic communities in Europe, the United States, and the Caribbean shared their thoughts with a mixture of fire and sorrow. For too long, one commenter wrote from Bamako, "We've allowed ourselves to believe we were powerless." But watching what Traore did, it reminded me that power was never outside, it was just waiting to be claimed. Some recalled the faces of past leaders Lumumba, Sankara, and Nkrumah, and felt history echoing through the eyes of Traore. He doesn't shout like a politician, said a young student from Nairobi. He speaks like a man who knows he might die for telling the truth, and still chooses to speak. That line was reposted thousands of times. Others described how their parents cried watching the speech. My father is 72. He hasn't spoken of politics in years, but tonight he said, "This one is different. He's not playing their game." From the working-class suburbs of Johannesburg to the tech cafes of Dakar, thousands began resharing clips, quotes, and moments from the story. Some made artwork, others wrote poetry. In Kumasi, a youth group held a public screening in the middle of a busy street market, projecting Traore's image on the wall of a warehouse. People stopped, they watched, they wept. But there was anger too, real raw anger, not just at Ouattara and Ruto, but at every African leader who had turned their back on their people. "We are done with the puppets," one man wrote from Kigali. "If you betray us, you will be remembered. Not as leaders, but as traitors in tailored suits." Others went further, demanding inquiries into mining contracts, foreign donations, and military aid that masked deeper agendas. "We now know," said a teacher from Lusaka, "that humanitarian aid isn't always about help. Sometimes it's just a Trojan horse." The comments became testimony, a digital rebellion. One by one, people began listing the stolen resources of their nations: oil, diamonds, uranium, cobalt, cocoa. They tied every theft back to complicit leaders and greedy corporations, and then to the silence that allowed it all. But silence, one woman wrote from London, is ending. That silence died the moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré opened his mouth and called it what it is: exploitation, plain and simple. African youth were among the most vocal. They saw in Traoré a reflection of what leadership could be: young, disciplined, unbought. Many openly asked, "Why is it that our heroes are always killed or smeared?" Others challenged media narratives, pushing back against headlines, branding Traoré a militant or radical. If defending your country's gold is radical, one viewer said, then may every African leader be a radical. From Cape Town to Casablanca, people started to dream aloud again. What if every nation had its own Traoré? What if we stopped asking for permission and started enforcing our own terms? One woman from Abidjan, ironically close to the center of the crisis, wrote anonymously, "I am Ivorian, and I am ashamed of my president, but I am not ashamed of Africa. Captain Traore made me proud to be African again." Burkina citizens left thousands of messages. Many simply wrote "Merci, Capitaine." Others offered to protect him. Some pledged to fast or pray for his safety. Even more powerful were the videos: young men in the streets holding up their national flag and yelling, "We are ready." Young women declaring, "We are watching. We will not let them touch you." The movement began to feel unstoppable, not because it was loud, but because it was deeply felt. Every post, every word, every cry for justice carried the same rhythm: "We are awake now. You cannot silence us again." The betrayal may have been plotted in boardrooms and embassies, but its failure was forged in the hearts of millions. And perhaps the most powerful reaction came not in a comment, but in a simple image. A grandmother in Burkina Faso, sitting outside her clay home, holding a photo of Traore in one hand and a small gold nugget in the other. The caption read, "He is our son." and this time we will not let them take him from us. Every theft back to complicit leaders and greedy corporations, and then to the silence that allowed it all. But silence, one woman wrote from London, is ending. That silence died the moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré opened his mouth and called it what it is: exploitation, plain and simple. African youth were among the most vocal. They saw in Traoré a reflection of what leadership could be: young, disciplined, unbought. Many openly asked, why is it that our heroes are always killed or smeared? Others challenged media narratives, pushing back against headlines, branding Traoré a militant or radical. If defending your country's gold is radical, one viewer said, then may every African leader be a radical. From Cape Town to Casablanca, people started to dream aloud again. What if every nation had its own Traoré? What if we stopped asking for permission and started enforcing our own terms? One woman from Abidjan, ironically close to the center of the crisis, wrote anonymously, I am Ivorian, and I am ashamed of my president. But I am not ashamed of Africa. Captain Traore made me proud to be African again. Burkina citizens left thousands of messages. Many simply wrote Merci Capitaine. Others offered to protect him. Some pledged to fast or pray for his safety. Even more powerful were the videos, young men in the streets holding up their national flag and yelling, "We are ready." Young women declaring, "We are watching. We will not let them touch you." The movement began to feel unstoppable, not because it was loud, but because it was deeply felt. Every post, every word, every cry for justice carried the same rhythm: we are awake now. You cannot silence us again. The betrayal may have been plotted in boardrooms and embassies, but its failure was forged in the hearts of millions. And perhaps the most powerful reaction came not in a comment, but in a simple image. A grandmother in Burkina Faso, sitting outside her clay home, holding a photo of Traoré in one hand and a small gold nugget in the other. The caption read, "He is our son, and this time we will not let them take him from us."